My question is more outward than what you've been talking about. I just sort of feel as though there's a big pie and everybody's nibbling at it. I'm talking, what my question is about is how can Australia be out there in a competitive world? I'm concerned about the state of the Australian economy. Most people are finding it difficult to get by. What are your thoughts about increasing our national revenue through encouraging industries back to our shores and struggling innovative companies to export? Also giving Australians a concession, and we were talking about this before, on things we do produce, such as oil and gas. But I don't want to be heavy on this oil and gas that everybody's talking about. I want, we used to support young people who had innovation in technology or, good ideas that we could sell to the rest of the world, and nobody seems to be talking about it.
And Faye, what kind of industries are you talking about?
Well, I'm not saying bring back the car industry or steel industry, but there's a lot of young people that are in the engineering world of technology, and yet governments just don't support them to help them get to the next step and export to the rest of the world.
Isn't that what Made in Australia might be about, David?
Potentially. It's light on details at the moment, but I think that is the idea. We've seen the Inflation Reduction Act and big investments in Europe to do exactly that, to ensure that we are investing in local manufacturing, in, I guess, what our strategic advantages are as a country. One of my concerns, to your point about young people going on and sort of building innovative businesses, is we've hit the lowest research and development as a percentage of GDP on record here in Australia. We're not investing enough in research, and I think that's starting to catch up with us. So I think that that is absolutely part of the puzzle, is investing in research, but then backing budding entrepreneurs and researchers here in Australia to commercialise. And then export it to the world. We've seen that happen in the past, and it can certainly be part of our future.
Okay.
Look, I think how to do that is the important question, and I think some of that is potentially the role of government for investment, but it's also saying what makes a place good and easy to grow businesses. Now, I've spoken to this amazing sort of AI business that helps in healthcare, and they said, frankly, we've got a contract with a third of the NHS, so we're across half, third of the UK. We can't get a substantial contract for our technology in Australia. Now, that's a different kind of problem, which is that we don't have the right procurement to actually incentivise and bring some of these great, great technology here. Or you have other situations.
Do we know why?
Look, I think when I speak to them, it's a risk aversion in relation to how we do government procurement. I've seen this in defence industries, I've seen this in healthcare industries, and it's just the complication.
Are we trying not to waste money?
I think we're trying not to waste money, and frankly, we're not thinking about the people on the other side of the contracts. I've been to one of the domestic violence charities in my area, and they say, look, we don't know 6 weeks before the end of the financial year whether we're going to get funded next year, so we lose good people. And so, we make it difficult. I've spoken to medical researchers who say, I spend 3 months of the year, developing grant applications rather than actually doing the medical research that I want to do. So it is actually about government making life easier.
Now, in Faye's question was oil and gas, and I want to go to gas because you mentioned it before, the government's unveiled that it will have a long-term gas policy to 2050. Do you think that's wise?
Well, I think everyone recognises that gas has an important role to play as we transition our energy system. No one's denying that. But this announcement doesn't seem to have anything to do with transitioning to a net zero economy, and seems to have everything to do with placating the gas industry and propping up Jim Chalmers' budget. So if we're serious about gas and protecting domestic manufacturing and putting downward pressure on electricity bills through the use of gas as we transition to a net zero economy, then why isn't the government putting in place a gas reservation policy?
Okay, so on gas, Cos, you've got some thoughts on this, I know, but
yeah.
this led to a sort of mini backbench revolt of government MPs who weren't happy. Obviously, Labor promised to be ambitious on climate change. Gas is a fossil fuel, and this has been quite contentious. Is it going to cost them?
Not really. So,
why not?
Well, basically, the seats that animated on climate change were the seats that Allegra won, the Teal Independents at the last election. 2022 was a climate change result. So we can see the full potential of what that looks like in the ballot box. What right now they are worried about as a government is how do they bolt down the discontent in the outer suburbs and regions of this country. We go back to manufacturing. Unless you give young people out there a future that's beyond just driving a Uber, beyond just basically working in the precariat, unless you give them a future, they're going to disconnect from politics and they're going to create the sort of political volatility that we're seeing across the Western world. So that's what they're focused on. They're focused on that particular constituency who really don't care about gas policy right now. They're worried about what their future looks like in the next 5 to 10 years.
And what does what they promise do to that cohort? Like, what? Yeah. How do they draw that?
Again, that doesn't. So if you talk about gas and anything in that space when it comes to energy, most punters out there think, well, okay, it's going to cost me something. If you say you want to phase out the gas industry, which I personally think there is a conversation there to be had, you're going to basically scare the horses. And at the moment, things are so sensitive out there that this government is completely preoccupied, in my opinion, justifiably preoccupied, on those outer suburban areas, like in seats like Werriwa and seats like Blair in Brisbane, where people are wanting to see a future from this government.
Okay, that's interesting.
Can I just jump in and say that 80% of that gas is exported overseas.
I know this.
It's not doing anything to help manufacturing domestically, and it's basically going to offshore companies who are making, huge super profits.
But the lived experience of these voters that I'm talking about is one of change equals bad news, okay? So when you're talking about energy policy and drastically changing energy policy that is about cutting things off, they think, right, OK, we're going to cop it in the neck.
OK, Senator David Pocock, I can see you want to get in.
I mean, isn't that leadership? You say, OK, it won't cost us this election, but it's going to cost all of us. We're expanding the gas industry in a climate crisis. Scientists are saying to us, we cannot keep warming under 2 degrees if we expand the fossil fuel industry. And what does the Labor government do? Say, we're going to expand the fossil fuel industry. We're going big on fossil fuels. This is the same government that knows that at 2 degrees, the Great Barrier Reef is gone. 99% of the Great Barrier Reef is gone. And that's where we're heading. But at least we'll get back in next election.
Well, how do you have leadership when you're not empowered? This is the problem. Taking that risk. I mean, we're talking about them because everybody's talking about the cost of living crisis. To the small businesses out there, you talk to them on what their issue is. They're not focused. I mean, yes, in a perfect world, they're worried about climate change. But today, they're worried about their energy costs and getting through. And that's the problem. Leadership is all very well to talk about this, but you have to be empowered to do things. We criticise them for not doing enough. We will worry if they do too much because they'll be out and we'll be back where we go on that. So it is always the problem. And no offence, but it is easier to be in the middle on this, where you're not actually having to do it.
3 million households suffer from
So there is an alternative proposal that we have not seen any detail on yet, but that's nuclear in this country. Do you think that's a good idea from the Liberal opposition?
What I think is a good idea is the energy policy that the Liberals in New South Wales
but
put in
just
place
on nuclear, do you think that's a dodge? Come on, Matt Kean, I'm on to you.
It's not.
Nuclear. Do you think we should have nuclear in Australia?
Well, let me expand on that, because I've been a Liberal energy minister that's put in place
I'm asking you.
a Liberal energy policy supported by the Liberal Party and the National Party and all parties across the parliament. And the test that we applied when building that policy is it going to drive down electricity bills? Is it going to ensure the system remains reliable? And is it going to set us up for a more prosperous future? And on all of those 3 questions, nuclear did not meet the threshold for us in New South Wales. In fact, it will be hugely costly. And as we looked more into it, we found that nuclear was a Trojan horse for the coal industry, who were looking to prolong coal longer to keep electricity prices higher and delay the transition, denying more supply coming into the system, which will lower bills and make it better for families and businesses.
OK. I've heard that argument before, that nuclear is a Trojan horse for fossil fuels. Do you believe it is, and that it's being pushed by fossil fuel interests in Canberra?
Well, I don't know in Canberra, but in New South Wales, there were 3 tests that we applied to determining our energy policy, and nuclear did not meet those tests.
And what do you make of... I know you're a New South Wales politician, but you care what your party does federally. What do you think of them taking nuclear to the next election?
Well, I think they need to explain it. I think they need to explain how it will meet those tests. But I looked at it in New South Wales. The chief scientist of New South Wales... Can you see them being able to explain it, or it becoming economic? Well, that's a matter for them.
Yeah, no, but can you see it happening?
Well, can I see it happening? We looked at it in New South Wales. We applied those tests.
I'm taking it as a no.
And it's not in part of the New South Wales Coalition's energy policy.